Welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America, Fairfield County, where we believe that change is possible and you can make it happen. I'm your host, Doug Sutherland. Our guests today are Tara Cook-Littman and Amanda Wendt from the grassroots organization GMO Free Connecticut. Tara is a former prosecutor who lives in Fairfield. She's a certified holistic health counselor and director of GMO Free Connecticut, an organization dedicated to getting legislation passed in Connecticut that would mandate the labeling of products containing genetically modified organisms, commonly known as GMOs. Tara is active in her community, volunteering with a wide variety of charitable and nonprofit organizations, including working with the Fairfield PTA to improve the quality of food in public schools. Tara is also a wife and mother of 3. Tara, welcome to Stream of Conscience.
Thank you.
Amanda Wendt is a former corporate video producer and currently runs her own web design business, catering to small businesses in the area. She is a member of the GMO Free Connecticut Leadership Council, where she handles communications and social media for the group. Amanda has a blog, The Organic Trail, where she chronicles her family's journey from eating processed foods to eating what she calls real food. She serves as an ambassador for Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution, and she's active in food education efforts in Trumbull, where she lives with her husband and 2 children. Amanda, welcome to Stream of Conscience.
Thank you.
I just want to start out by saying that this whole issue of genetically modified organisms in our food supply is something that just wasn't on my radar until Amanda got in touch with me a couple of months ago. And as I began to do research and learn more about it, I got more concerned, but I was also fascinated by how many angles this issue has, and how many of them are things that we've dealt with on this show. It has political aspect, it has public health, environmental issues, and to me, most importantly, this is the corporate power issue, which we've dealt with a lot, corporate personhood, corporate speech rights. We've dealt with that a lot in light of the Citizens United case. So I think this is a fascinating topic, and we're really happy to have you guys on to shed some light on it. So before we get into it, I'd like to ask each of you to tell me a little bit about how you got involved with this issue. I think it's kind of taken over both of your lives to a certain extent. What led you to this? So.
Well, I learned about GMOs probably 5 or 6 years ago when I started down a similar path that Amanda has gone down to take my family and myself from processed foods to real foods. And once I learned about GMOs, I felt that I needed to share that information with everyone I possibly could. And so I started doing talks about GMOs and all the aspects that you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there was no GMO labeling bill in Connecticut. Once there was, and I heard about it, I went up to Hartford to testify. And that was the beginning of GMO Free Connecticut.
Okay. And what about you, Amanda?
I probably learned about it 2 years ago when I got involved with the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation. I became a real food advocate, and I was blogging about transitioning from processed to real foods. And I saw a TEDx talk given by Robin O'Brien, who heads up Allergy Kids Foundation. And that was the first time I had even heard the word genetically modified organisms. And so I started doing exactly what Tara did, blogging about it, talking to friends and family. And last year I found out that there was a labeling bill in Connecticut. And so on my own, just through my own avenues, I would let people know about it and say, hey, talk to your legislators, this is important. But in the meantime, I also had Tara come to the Trumbull Library and speak and give her talk, and that was how we met. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think it's a very complicated, wide-ranging issue, and so what I'd like to do on this segment is let's focus on the technical aspects of it, what they are, who's pushing them, and what our concerns are, and then we'll come back in a second segment with Tara, and we'll talk about the political aspects, what GMO Free Connecticut is trying to do in Hartford with the labeling bill. Okay, mm-hmm. So why don't we start out with defining some terms? We need to define what a genetically modified organism is. So who wants to?
So GMOs, genetically modified organisms, are created in a science lab when you take the DNA from one species, such as bacteria and viruses, and insert it into the genes of another species, such as vegetables or animals. this is done to confer a specific trait on the vegetable or animal. Specifically, when we're talking about GMOs, they're trying to create herbicide-tolerant crops and also crops that produce their own pesticide.
Okay. And I think it's also known as GE, genetically engineered organisms also, so that's a term you'll see, right?
Correct.
Amanda, can you tell us how is this different from, what farmers have been doing for years, crossbreeding and natural selection of seeds that have traits that we want?
I think the main difference between a GMO and hybridization is that in the lab, they're actually taking it and inserting it into the gene. It's not happening in a natural environment. Farmers have been doing this for years and years and years, but it happens in the natural environment, so they can see how it's growing, what happens when it's growing, and they can make modifications from there. What's happening in the lab is that these genes are can have alterations, and then once it gets out into the natural environment, may not react or grow in the way that the lab assumed that it would. Okay. And that's where we're beginning to see a lot of issues.
Right. And I think the other issue, too, is that when it's done in the lab, you can cross species boundaries,
right,
which is not something that happens in nature.
No, you're not going to.
So you can take animal genes and put them into plants and
right,
vice versa.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a whole new, ball game, and nobody really knows, the effects that these organisms may have.
Exactly.
There seems to be two main types of GMOs that we're concerned about, right? So, maybe you want to explain what those are. There's the Bt toxin and there's the Roundup Ready.
Right.
The plants that are Bt toxin producing actually produce their own poison. Every cell of that plant produces this toxin. And the other kind of GMO that they have created is Roundup Ready, herbicide tolerant, so that you can spray the fields with herbicides, kill all the weeds, and the plant will still grow. Obviously, there's a lot of implications to both of these,
right,
which I'm not sure if you would like to go into now, but really very big problems for our health, for our environment, and also ethical reasons.
Right. Yeah, I think we'll get into that more a little bit later. I'd next like to look at how are these being introduced into our food supply. I think a lot of people have never heard of this. I knew very little about it, and so I'd like to know, how did this come to be? When did this start happening?
It happened in approximately 1995. It went through the process of being approved by the FDA, but the FDA gave it what's known as GRAS status, generally recognized as safe. So it didn't have to go through any safety human testing, the way I think a lot of people think the FDA does. And by getting this GRAS status, it made it so that it could just go right into the food system without any additional testing. Most of the testing that is done on it is only 90 days, and it's done on rodents. And there just hasn't been enough research done on it on the human population until now. We are kind of it.
All right, and I read where part of the reasons this got such quick approval is that there seems to be a revolving door between the biotech industry and government.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, our current food safety czar in the FDA is a man called Michael Taylor.
Protecting the food supply, making it safe, making it nutritious is one of the most fundamental duties of government and then, of course, of FDA. When you think about the importance of food to public health, to the health of people, there's really nothing more fundamental.
Michael Taylor, back in the 80s and early 90s, was actually an attorney for one of the biggest biotech companies, Monsanto. And Michael Taylor actually drafted the paperwork for Monsanto to get GMOs granted this GRAS status. Right before the paperwork was cleared for the FDA, Michael Taylor went and worked at the FDA rather than being Monsanto's attorney, approved GMOs as GRAS status, and then left the FDA and went to work as one of Monsanto's vice presidents. And like I said again today, he's back at the FDA. Now, GMOs were granted GRAS status completely illegally, and I just want to point out that there are two requirements that products need to meet in order to be granted GRAS status. One is they either have to be in the food supply for so long that there's no disagreement that the item is safe. GMOs did not meet that requirement. They had never been in our food. So the other requirement that you would need to meet to be granted GRAS status is that there's wide agreement within the scientific community that a product is safe and that agreement needs to be based upon scientific evidence.
Okay.
So GMOs didn't have that either. There was no scientific proof that they were safe, and the FDA's own scientists warned their superiors that GMOs needed more testing. So there was not only no agreement in the scientific community, but the FDA's own scientists did not think that GMOs should be granted GRAS status.
Right. Okay. Wow. Well, what kind of crops are we talking about here? You know, how many genetically modified plants are we talking about?
There's 5 main ones. There's soy, cotton, canola, corn, and
Sugar beets.
Sugar beets, thank you. And those are in so many of our processed foods that we're eating. I think it's almost 80% of the processed foods.
Canola oil is in a lot of things, right?
Canola or soybean oil, and soybean oil
okay.
is also, can also be a derivative of a GMO. Sugar beets are what are used for sugar that's in our food system as well. Corn can be used as high fructose corn syrup as well. So it's really the basis of most of the nutrition that's in the processed foods that we're eating. There are some additional, papaya is one, and all papaya has been at this point genetically modified.
Okay, wow. And it's not just that if you eat those foods too, it's also some of the stuff is fed to animals that then produce food, you know.
It's used as feed for cattle and for chicken.
Feed. So we can also absorb these things from eating those foods as well. I read somewhere where that 70% of food products right now contain some kind of GMO in some way or another.
Yes, we've heard anywhere from between 70 to 80% of processed foods contain at least one genetically modified ingredient.
Wow, that's really astounding.
It's high.
I always challenge people to go to the supermarket and try to find a processed food that's not organic or non-GMO project verified that doesn't have a GMO in it, because GMOs hide in over 100 aliases. So you can't just look for the name corn, soy, sugar, canola, or cottonseed oil.
Right.
You need to know what aliases they hide under, and that's lecithin, vitamin E, things you would never even imagine have been taken from GMO sources.
Wow. Okay. Just to step back a little bit, what companies are we talking about that are doing this? What are the major names in the biotech industry that are involved with this?
Well, you're talking about Monsanto, Dow, Syngenta, Bayer. Those are really the big ones.
Okay.
And this is the biotech industry that at some point made a very strategic decision that they wanted to go into the seed and food business.
Right. They're primarily chemical industries. They weren't food companies.
No.
They were chemical industries that were looking for a new market.
Yes.
Right.
Same companies that told us that DDT and PCBs were safe are now the companies providing us our food.
Right. And I think our patent system has also helped them, because we've allowed them to patent these genetically modified organisms, and they no longer allow farmers to recollect their seeds and reuse them. So they're kind of, we're approaching a situation where there's a monopoly on our food supply.
And this is worldwide. 53% of the seeds in the world are owned by 3 companies at this point in time.
Wow. This is, to me, a lot of this stuff is astounding, considering that very few people know about it. It's just under the radar. Obviously, there's a reason why these companies, I mean, they were obviously trying to make money, but, they're claiming certain things about these new genetically modified organisms that will benefit consumers. So can you tell us a little bit about, what are their claims?
Their claims are that the crops will have higher yields, and that farmers will be able to use less pesticides in producing it, which seems to be a good thing, less pesticides in our bodies and higher yields. But the proof has been that that's actually not taking place. There was a study done recently by the University of Washington State University, that showed that the crop yields are actually less with any of the Roundup Ready seeds. The University of Wisconsin is also in the process of working on research to show the crop yields as well. And what's happened with the pesticides is that by using the Roundup Ready seeds and then Roundup on it, we're creating super weeds, and these are weeds that are being created because of nature, that are no longer resistant to Roundup. And so now Monsanto is coming out with a new product that will include more pesticides, and it's actually a derivative of Agent Orange to use on the fields to counter these super weeds. So what they're claiming is not actually what's happening.
Okay. Wow. Well, let's get to the health and environmental concerns. You know, I think the main message here is that not enough testing has been done. There seems to be some testing that shows great concern for human health and the environment. What are some of those issues?
Well, so first, some health issues. There was recently a study done by Professor Seralini over in France. It was the first long-term feeding study ever conducted on GMOs. He fed rats GMOs for 2 years, and they suffered from early death, organ damage, and had severe large tumors that you can actually see right online. The first feeding study ever done. And drastic results. So that's one thing. GMOs have also been linked with gastrointestinal disease, with immunological disorders, and with infertility. So, and these are all animal studies that have been conducted, independent animal studies. So those are some of the health risks. Environmentally, I think we have to be very concerned about the amount of chemicals being used and what's happening with those chemicals. They're going into our water, they're destroying our soil, and they're ending up in our bodies. And so it's a huge problem, and it's not sustainable. We cannot continue this way with big ag and this industrial food system. We really need to rethink what we've created here.
Right. As far as human health goes, what are some of the concerns? I know there's been a concern that there's been a rise in food allergies.
Well, there's been a rise in food allergies since GMOs were put into the food system. We've also seen a rise in diabetes, and there was a huge spike after 1997, and that's after the GMOs had been put into the food system. We're seeing increases in autism. We're seeing increases in obesity, and all of these, we don't have causation because there is no research, but the correlation to me is compelling, given how sick Americans are becoming. And when you see when the climbs and the charts happen, it directly correlates to when GMOs were put into the food.
And I think some of this is in the U.S. and not in Europe. And we might want to say a few things about what's going on in Europe. Europe has a labeling bill, right?
Well, 62 countries already label GMOs. The United States is one of the only civilized countries in the world that does not label GMOs. And what happens is that these countries that require labeling, oftentimes the companies, rather than label, will reformulate their products, take the GMOs out. So you will not find GMOs in Kraft cornflakes in Europe.
Right.
Or you will not find GMOs in McDonald's food over in Europe, or in Pepsi soda, because they just take the GMOs out. So Europeans are not ingesting GMOs the way Americans are. And in countries where these manufacturers still decide to use GMOs, at a minimum, at least the citizens of those countries can make the choice for themselves about whether to eat them or not.
Right. And I think what we've seen in Europe is that once people have a choice, they choose, organic or non-GMO.
Sure.
I saw somebody said nobody gets up in the morning and says, gee, I want to rush off to the store and buy some GMO, products, so.
There's really no benefit to the consumer whatsoever.
Right.
The benefit is only to the companies that are making money based on GMOs, but there's no benefit to consumers.
Right. And I think children are especially a concern here with GMOs too, right?
And I think that's what really piqued my interest in all of that, because I have 2 young children and Tara has 3. And as a mother, you're concerned about what you're feeding your kids. You want to give them healthy and nutritious food, and their metabolisms work so much faster. And I was concerned about not only the pesticides, but also what these GMOs could be doing to their bodies, especially during this period of their life when they're growing,
right.
And they're using those nutrients as fuel.
Right. I think soy is a big issue in baby formula, is one of the things. And there's also some nutritional concerns. The Roundup kills weeds by, inhibiting them from attaching to nutrients. And the residue from that can go into, our bodies, and we can have trouble absorbing the nutrients as well, perhaps.
Well, it's actually proven in some studies that Roundup is a chelator, and what that means is it sucks the nutrients out of plants. That's how it kills the weeds.
Okay.
So when we're ingesting Roundup, it's chelating, it's taking away all the nutrients and vitamins from our bodies as well.
There was also a Canadian study that was done with Bt toxin that proved that pregnant women who were eating GMOs that were made with the Bt toxin, that it was found in their fetuses, in the blood of the fetuses, that it was actually passing from mother to fetus. So before your child's even born, they're being, they're receiving this as well.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we can avoid this if we decide this isn't something that we want. Right now, there's no labeling in the U.S. What is a parent to do, or a consumer to do if they want to go ahead and try to eat a more healthy diet?
One of the easiest things to do is to eat organic. All organic food that has the USDA organic stamp on it cannot contain any genetically modified ingredients. So that would be your first step. The second step is there's a program called non-GMO Verified Project, and that's a little label that's on foods right now with an orange butterfly. And if you go to the supermarket and you look for that, you'll know that those foods have gone through testing to ensure that they do not contain any genetically modified ingredients. From there, it's really, just reading the labels and knowing that all of those secret ingredients. The Institute for Responsible Technology puts out a non-GMO shopping guide. They have an app for your phones, and they also have a PDF that you can download from their website, and that lists all of what those secret ingredients can be. And that helps you identify in the grocery store which ones are more likely to have genetically modified organisms.
Are most normal grocery stores now carrying this kind of thing that you can find, or do you have to go to a health food store?
No, most grocery stores have a natural foods aisle. You have to be careful with the word natural, because just because it says natural doesn't mean that it's organic. So you really have to become a label reader, and that's where education is so important, so people understand what they're supposed to be looking for. But most grocery stores now do carry that. A Whole Foods would, Stop and Shops in our area carry many, and it's also important to talk to your supermarkets and ask them for it too.
Right. Right.
And of course, what Amanda and I would both say is the best way to avoid GMOs, avoid processed foods altogether.
Right.
Eat real food.
Okay.
Because if you eat real food, you're avoiding GMOs naturally. And just avoid corn that's not organic, soy that's not organic, and Hawaiian papaya, and you're avoiding GMOs. It's really when you're eating the processed foods that you need to be concerned.
Okay.
And of course, meat and dairy, you'll want to stick with organic as well.
Right.
Because otherwise the cattle and the animals like chickens are being fed GMOs.
Okay.
If it's not organic.
Now, what if you have a baby, and as far as the infant formula, are you able to buy organic infant formula?
There are organic infant formulas that are available.
Okay.
So that is definitely something that you can do. And when they transition to foods, we would recommend that you make the baby food. It's not hard to do, but if you need to purchase baby food, there's plenty of organic choices out there as well.
Okay. And if people want to learn more about this, I know there's several movies about this. You want to talk a little bit about those?
Sure. Well, one movie was done by Jeffrey Smith. He's really the country's leading spokesperson on the dangers of GMOs. And he recently released a DVD called Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives. And that really chronicles all the health concerns, environmental concerns, political concerns surrounding GMOs. So I highly recommend that movie. Another one is by Gary Null, who is very well known in the natural health field, and he came out with a documentary recently called Seeds of Death. So that's another one. And then, of course, Jeffrey Smith has 2 books, Genetic Roulette, Seeds of Deception, and Stephen Drucker just came out with a new book as well that people can look for on Amazon.
Okay, we'll put the links up. And I think Jeffrey Smith's website is responsibletechnology.org.
Correct.
That's right. Okay. Well, this is clearly a complicated issue, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about it in the coming months. And we're going to bring you guys back on the next segment. We'll talk about what's going on in Hartford, and we really appreciate you coming on the show and enlightening us about this, and hopefully more people will get involved and see, because it's really important. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can catch all our shows on YouTube by going to youtube.com/user/DFATVnet. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and you can send comments or suggestions for a show to info@dfa-tv.net. If you'd like to learn more about progressive political action, we meet on the first Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We'd love to have you join us. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience. I'm your host, John Hartwell. Thanks for watching.